said he was a salesman.
By the early 1970s, Frank Sutton had quietly shifted away from television fame and found new life performing on stage. Known for his fiery role in Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., few people realized how much he truly loved live theater. In June 1974, he arrived for what should have been just another performance. The audience was seated. The cast was ready. And Sutton was moments away from stepping out. But before the curtain could rise, something tragic unfolded behind the scenes, revealing a heartbreaking reality that made his sudden death at just 50 even more devastating. The unexpected road to fame. This story really gets going at the Leaf Chronicle in Clarksville, where Frank Sims Sutton and Thelma Sutton first met. Frank worked as a linotypist, while Thelma was the kind of person every newsroom depends on, the one doing a bit of everything. She handled bookkeeping, proofreading, and even wrote for the paper when needed. Somewhere in the middle of all that hustle, the two of them fell for each other, got married, and soon started building a life together. Not long after, on October 23, 1923, their son Frank Spencer Sutton was born on South 2nd Street. As a kid, Frank was exactly what you'd expect, full of energy, always outside, and usually coming home covered in dirt. But even early on, there were signs he wasn't just another neighborhood kid. One moment, in particular, stuck with his family. After being given some grease paint, young Frank didn't just play around with it. He turned it into a performance. Face painted, fully committed, he put on a show right there at home and told his family straight up that he was going to be an actor. At the time, it felt like one of those cute childhood declarations. It wasn't until years later they realized he meant every word. Behind that confidence, though, his early life had its challenges. In a later interview with the Tennessean, Sutton opened up about how unstable things could be growing up. His father had a quick temper, and it meant the family was always on the move, bouncing between Evansville, Elkton, and Paris, before finally settling in Nashville in the mid-1930s. That's where his father found steady work again, this time as a linotype operator at the Tennessean, and the family moved into an apartment on Russell Street. In Nashville, Frank began to find some structure. Tulip Street Methodist Church became a major part of his routine, and he threw himself into activities there, including Boy Scout Troop 34, where he even served as the group's scribe. It was a sign of the discipline and focus he was starting to develop. He attended Howell Grammar School, which had a personal connection. His mother had gone there years before. Academically, Frank leaned more toward the brainy side. He spent hours at the public library, building a lifelong habit of reading. That love for books never left him. Years later, when he was living in Beverly Hills, his personal library held nearly 3,000 books, and he had read every single one. By the fall of 1937, Frank entered East Nashville Junior High, and this is where things really started to shift. This was his first real taste of acting, performing in a school play called Romance in a Boarding House. It wasn't a huge production, but it planted a seed. Then, in March of 1938, life took a serious turn when his father passed away suddenly. Frank and his mother stayed in their home on Russell Street, and Thelma stepped up, taking a job as a proofreader at the Tennessean to keep things afloat. At that time, Nashville's public school system didn't include high school until the 10th grade, so it wasn't until the fall of 1939 that Frank started at East High School as a sophomore. At first, he leaned into athletics, trying out for the football team. But almost immediately, he hit a setback. An injury during the very first scrimmage sidelined him. Still, he pushed through it and made it back onto the field by November, even earning a mention in the local paper for a commendable performance. But sports weren't the whole story. Frank joined the Spanish club, stayed active around school, and before long, he found himself pulled back toward the stage. By the middle of his sophomore year, acting had taken center stage again. He became deeply involved in the drama club, landing roles in productions like The Life of Mary Keller and The Valiant. At that point, the direction of his life was becoming clearer. Football might have been something he could do, but acting was where he belonged. By his junior year in 1940, Frank had settled into that identity. He joined the Delta chapter of Phi Alpha Pi, one of the high school fraternities that were hugely popular at the time, even if school administrators didn't exactly approve. The group held social events, including a winter banquet and dance at the Hermitage Hotel, where Frank attended with a date from East Nashville named Amelia Whitsitt. Around that same time, his acting started gaining real momentum. That December, he landed a role in You Can't Take It With You, a production directed by Miss Carolyn Binkley. But he didn't limit himself to school performances. By the spring, he was stepping into the wider theater scene, performing with the Community Playhouse in productions like The Pursuit of Happiness and Toad of Toad Hall. Then, just as the school year was coming to a close, he secured a role in another play, Male Animal. It might have seemed like just another credit at the time, but it came with an interesting connection. One of his castmates, Ophelia Colley, would later go on to marry Henry Cannon and reinvent herself as Minnie Pearl, becoming one of the most recognizable figures in country comedy. By the summer of 1941, Frank and his mother were ready for another fresh start. They left behind their apartment on Russell Street, a place they had called home for 7 years, which for Frank was the longest stretch of stability he'd ever known. This time, they moved to a building on 19th Avenue South, right at the corner of 19th and West End, just as he was stepping into his senior year at Peabody Demonstration School. And Frank didn't slow down for a second. If anything, he picked up the pace. While keeping up with school, he stayed fully locked into acting, performing in multiple productions with the Children's Theater, the Community Playhouse, and the Peabody Players. It was clear he wasn't just experimenting anymore, he was building something. What makes that period even more interesting is the company he kept. Among his classmates were Betty Page, who would later rise to fame as the iconic Queen of Pinups, and Delbert Mann, who would go on to become a major force in Hollywood as a director and producer. Even then, it felt like something special was brewing in that circle. Offstage, Frank stayed just as active. He worked on the yearbook staff and took on a leadership role as co-editor of the school newspaper, The Volunteer. His days were packed, but he handled it all like someone who already knew where he was headed. By the spring of 1942, he graduated, but there was no pause, no moment of sitting back to figure things out. He was already deep in the local theater world. Around that time, he picked up a Saturday morning slot on WSIX radio, where he showed just how versatile he really was. He wasn't just reading lines. He brought entire worlds to life, voicing a full lineup of characters with ease. Still, life wasn't all bright lights and applause. After graduation, he took on regular jobs, including a short stint at the Neuhoff Packing Company, and even spent time working as a radio announcer back in Clarksville. It was a reminder that the path forward wasn't guaranteed. Then came the war. Like many young men of his generation, Frank wanted to serve. He tried to enlist in both the Marines and the Navy, but was turned away because of color blindness, a frustrating setback. Eventually, in March of 1943, he found his way in through the Army, joining the Signal Corps. From there, his experience was anything but ordinary. He became part of a Joint Assault Signal Company, a specialized unit made up of both Army and Navy personnel. Within just a year and a half, he was involved in 14 different landings across the Pacific, including major operations in places like Leyte, Luzon, Bataan, and Corregidor. When the war ended, he was sent to Korea as part of the occupation forces. Even in the middle of all that, the performer in him never disappeared. While stationed overseas, he wrote, directed, and produced a radio program called the Military Government Hour. Whether on a stage or in uniform, he kept finding ways to use his voice. By January 1946, Sergeant Frank Sutton was discharged and back in Nashville. For most people, that would have been a moment to rest. For Frank, it was a signal to get moving again. Within weeks, he was already back on stage, taking on the role of Nick in The Time of Your Life at the Community Playhouse. He had barely any time to prepare, but that didn't stop him. That entire year, he became a regular presence at the Playhouse, doing more than just acting. He got hands-on with the productions, helping design and build sets, fully immersing himself in every part of the craft. By the fall of 1946, he made a bold move, heading to New York to study drama and speech at Columbia University. But he never cut ties with home. The following summer, he returned to Nashville to perform in Love for Love before heading back to continue his studies. Over the next few years, he kept sharpening his skills, spending the summers of 1948 and 1949 working with John Kenley's Deer Lake Theater Company. It was during this time, in 1948, that he made his first appearance on television, another step forward in a rapidly evolving career. Around the same time, his personal life was falling into place as well. In August of 1949, he married Toby Eigler, a fellow Columbia student he had met during his time in New York. Their connection had been immediate, and it quickly turned into something lasting. By the end of that year, he was back performing in Nashville, appearing at the Ryman Auditorium with the Deer Lake Theater Company in the Barretts of Wimpole Street. Not long after, in October 1950, he stepped onto a much bigger stage, television. He appeared in a production of O. Henry on the Nash Air Flight Theater broadcast nationwide on CBS from New York. At this point, Frank and Toby were building their life in the city, and his career was steadily gaining traction. He moved between stage and television, putting in the work and building a reputation. Then came the breakthrough. In 1955, he landed a role in the film Marty, a project that would go on to win the Academy Award and several Oscars. That moment changed everything, opening doors in film and pushing his career to a new level. From there, the late 1950s and early 1960s became a period of constant momentum. He secured a long-running role on the soap opera The Secret Storm, starting in 1959, and by 1961, he was appearing in films like Town Without Pity. Finally, in 1964, he made another major move, this time to Hollywood. It was all for a new opportunity, a supporting role in a television series that would define his legacy. Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., where he starred alongside Jim Nabors, the man behind Sergeant Carter. For a lot of viewers, Jim Nabors first showed up as the soft-spoken, wide-eyed Gomer Pyle during his run on The Andy Griffith Show. But the way he landed that role feels like one of those moments where television history could have gone completely differently. At the time, Nabors wasn't even a TV regular. He was working nightclub stages, doing his act, when Andy Griffith happened to catch him. Griffith saw something in him right away and brought him in. Still, according to Daniel DeVisey's book, Andy and Don, Nabors wasn't the first name on the list. That spot was almost given to George Lindsay. Lindsay had the resume, college football background, Broadway experience, and enough small TV roles to look like a safe bet. Producer Aaron Rubin was ready to lock it in. From his point of view, Lindsay sounded polished, experienced, and ready to go. Then, right before the deal was done, Griffith stepped in. After rehearsal one day, he casually asked if the filling station attendant had been cast. When he heard the decision was basically made, he asked Rubin to meet someone first. In walked Jim Nabors. He didn't have the same professional edge Lindsay brought to the table, but the second he started reading, that didn't matter anymore. What he lacked in polish, he made up for with something you can't really teach, a kind of innocent, natural charm that instantly felt right for the role. That moment flipped the decision, and just like that, Gomer Pyle belonged to Nabors. Even then, nobody, especially Nabors, thought it would turn into anything big. When Griffith first reached out to him about the part, Nabors wasn't exactly eager. He hesitated, unsure if he even had the acting ability to pull it off. It took some serious convincing to get him to just give it a shot. Back then, he didn't see himself as a real actor yet. He just knew how to perform. In the end, he leaned into it anyway, figuring it out as he went. And that approach worked. On screen, Gomer Pyle was this lovable, slightly clueless mechanic who seemed to understand everything about cars. Off-screen, Nabors couldn't have been further from that. He didn't know his way around an engine at all, but the role didn't require him to actually fix anything, just to sound like he could. And he sold it so well that nobody watching ever questioned it. Originally, Gomer was supposed to be a one-time character, one episode, quick appearance, and that was it. But audiences connected with him immediately. One episode turned into more, and more turned into a full run. 23 appearances across 2 seasons. That kind of reaction doesn't happen by accident. It was clear something special had clicked. That momentum carried straight into a spin-off, Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., where the transition felt almost seamless. A lot of the same creative team came along, including Rubin, who had already spent time shaping the character in Mayberry. Rubin took that responsibility seriously. He wanted to make sure Gomer didn't lose what made him work in the first place. Even though he was a New Yorker with no real connection to Southern life, he went out of his way to understand it, traveling to North Carolina, spending time with Griffith's family, and getting a feel for the culture firsthand. That effort showed in the way the character stayed grounded, even in a completely new setting. The new show took Gomer out of the small-town comfort of Mayberry and dropped him into the structured world of the Marine Corps. But instead of turning into a hard-edged military story, it leaned fully into Gomer's personality. The humor came from watching his easygoing, good-natured outlook collide with strict rules and discipline. Even during a time when television was starting to reflect major social and political changes, the show stayed intentionally light. It kept things focused on camaraderie, routine, and character dynamics rather than conflict or controversy. The setting might have been military, but the tone never drifted into war storytelling. The Marines themselves supported the show's approach, even allowing filming on a base in San Diego. That kind of cooperation helped give the series an authentic backdrop without changing its spirit. Then there was Frank Sutton as Sergeant Carter, the perfect counterbalance to Gomer. Loud, intense, and constantly on edge, Carter felt like a man permanently stuck in drill mode. As a Korean War veteran, his character carried that no-nonsense energy into every scene, usually with one goal in mind: figuring out how to get Gomer out of his unit. The role had clear roots, especially in the tough drill instructor played by Jack Webb in the DI. But Sutton didn't just copy that blueprint. He pushed it into something bigger, something more exaggerated and memorable. You can even see shades of his performance years later in R. Lee Ermey's portrayal of Sergeant Hartman in Full Metal Jacket. What made Sutton's performance even more interesting is where he came from. Before this, he wasn't known for comedy at all. He built his career playing dangerous, hard-edged characters, criminals, killers, the kind of roles that made audiences uneasy. He played those parts so convincingly that people would react to him like he was the villain in real life. Switching into comedy wasn't just a career move, it was a complete shift in identity. And he didn't approach it like a traditional comedian. There was no background in stand-up, no instinct for improvisation. Instead, he treated comedy like a craft to be studied. He worked on timing, rehearsed constantly, and relied heavily on structure and precision. It was a technical approach, almost like he was engineering the laughs instead of chasing them. Over time, that method paid off. He found his rhythm, built his own style, and turned Sergeant Carter into something iconic. But while Sutton had the acting chops to deliver that booming, no-nonsense voice, what really grounded his performance as Sergeant Carter was something much more personal: his own time in the military. In interviews over the years, Sutton made it clear that his experience in uniform shaped the way he approached the role. He wasn't a Marine, though. During the World War II, he served as an Army sergeant. Still, he had a deep respect for the Marine Corps and believed strongly in what it stood for. From his perspective, the Corps had a reputation for pushing men to their absolute limits and setting them on a disciplined path for life, and that belief fed directly into how he portrayed Carter. Despite the light tone of the series, Sutton approached the role with the same seriousness he would give to any dramatic part. He believed preparation mattered, no matter the genre. Comedy, in his view, still required discipline. It just meant finding different angles within the character to make moments land. From the very beginning, he had a clear idea of who Sergeant Carter was: tough, rigid, and deeply disciplined, but never just a one-note authority figure. There was always something human beneath the surface, and a lot of that didn't come from the script. Sutton built much of Carter himself, adding layers and small touches that eventually started influencing how the writers shaped the character. The show stayed strong from 1964 to 1969, holding on to both its audience and its identity the entire time. And rather than dragging things out until the magic wore off, Sutton and Jim Nabors made a rare move. They chose to walk away while everything was still working, leaving the series at its peak instead of watching it slowly fade. The real reason Frank Sutton died at 50 is heartbreaking. When Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C. came to an end in 1969, it looked like the curtain was finally closing on the unforgettable pairing of Sergeant Carter and Private Pyle. But behind the scenes, that bond didn't just disappear. Frank Sutton, along with fellow cast member Ronnie Schell, followed Jim Nabors into his next chapter on the Jim Nabors Variety Hour, keeping that creative chemistry alive in a whole new setting. At first glance, Sutton's role on the show seemed pretty straightforward. Critics described him as a singing, dancing, buffooning co-star, leaning into the kind of broad comedy audiences already loved him for. But that description barely scratched the surface. Because offstage, Sutton was something else entirely. There was a quieter, more thoughtful side to him that most viewers never got to see. This was a man with an Ivy League drama education, someone who surrounded himself with over 3,000 books, constantly reading, constantly learning. The same guy known for barking orders and losing his temper on screen was, in real life, deeply intellectual and endlessly curious. That contrast made him even more fascinating. Still, the variety show didn't last long. After just 2 seasons, it became another casualty of CBS's so-called rural purge, a sweeping shift in programming that wiped out a whole era of television, including fan favorites like The Beverly Hillbillies, Mayberry RFD, and Green Acres. Just like that, Sutton found himself at another crossroads. Rather than chase more television roles right away, he turned back to where his passion had always lived: the stage. Not Broadway, though. Sutton found his rhythm in dinner theater, a booming scene throughout the 1970s. These productions brought live performance to audiences across the country, pairing solid acting with a full night out. Good food, drinks, and entertainment all rolled into one. For actors like Sutton, it was both steady work and a chance to stay connected to the craft. He became a familiar face on that circuit, traveling from city to city, stepping into roles that showed off his range. He played George, the bitter, wronged husband in No Hard Feelings, and took on Oscar Madison in The Odd Couple, fully embracing the messy charm of the character. It was a different pace from television, but one he clearly enjoyed. By May of 1974, Sutton arrived in Shreveport, Louisiana, preparing for a new production. Love, a sharp, absurdist comedy written by Murray Shisgill. The story itself was offbeat, centered on a man trying to pass his wife off to an old college friend so he could run off with his mistress. It had a strong pedigree, too, with earlier versions featuring names like Mike Nichols, Alan Arkin, Ely Wallach, Jack Lemmon, and Peter Falk. For this run at the Beverly Barn Dinner Playhouse, Sutton starred alongside regional actress Elizabeth Ives. It wasn't just another job, it was a family trip as well. He brought his wife, Toby Igler, and their young daughter Amanda, along with him, while his son Joseph remained at Dartmouth, focused on his studies. Everything seemed routine as the production moved into its 3rd weekend. On the evening of June 28, 1974, the theater buzzed with anticipation. Dinner service was wrapping up, the audience settling in, ready for the show to begin. Backstage, Sutton prepared in his dressing room, just moments away from stepping out. Then, without warning, everything changed. Frank Sutton suffered a massive heart attack and died before he could make his entrance. He was just 50 years old. The responsibility of telling the audience fell to Elizabeth Ives. She stepped onto the stage, facing a crowd that had come expecting laughter, and instead delivered heartbreaking news. There would be no performance that night. The room, once filled with energy, fell into stunned silence. One by one, people quietly gathered their things and made their way out, the evening ending in a way no one could have imagined. Later, Ives reflected on something that felt almost eerie. During rehearsals, Sutton had mentioned more than once that if an actor had to die, the theater would be the place to do it. In a strange, tragic way, that's exactly how it happened. News of his passing hit hard, especially for Jim Nabors, who was in Honolulu at the time. Away from the pressures of public life, Nabors had built a more private existence there, but Sutton's death shook him deeply. He spoke about their years working side by side, long days that stretched up to 14 hours, and the bond they built over nearly a decade. To him, Sutton wasn't just a co-star, but a dedicated actor and a devoted family man. The production of Love was canceled in the aftermath. In its place, the theater brought in a short run of Beginner's Luck, starring Bob Crane, another familiar face known for playing military roles on television. That decision would later carry its own dark twist, as Crane himself would be tragically murdered just a few years later while performing that same play in Arizona. After memorial services in Los Angeles, Sutton was laid to rest in his hometown of Clarksville, Tennessee, honoring his final wishes. In a poetic sense, it was like taking one last journey home, closing the loop on a life that had traveled far but never lost its roots. Even years later, his work continues to resonate. In 2009, comedy historian Cliff Nesteroff launched the Frank Sutton Appreciation Society, highlighting just how essential Sutton's performances were. His explosive reactions, his timing, his ability to bring depth to what could have been a one-note character, those were the things that made Sergeant Carter unforgettable. Without him, Gomer Pyle simply wouldn't have had the same spark. And for those passing through downtown Clarksville today, there's a lasting tribute waiting. A bronze statue stands in his honor, capturing him in full Sergeant Carter form, a permanent reminder of the man who brought so much energy, humor, and humanity to the screen.